I never thought the forest could feel heavier at night, but sometimes it does. Sometimes it feels like the trees are listening, like the wind holds its breath, like the darkness has a pulse of its own. People imagine forests as peaceful, quiet places where birds sing and rivers hum in the distance. And most days that's exactly what it is. But when you work as a lookout in a national forest, you learn pretty fast that nature has two faces. One is warm and welcoming. The other is something you only understand when you've been out here long enough to hear the silence move. My name is Ryan, and I've been working as a forest lookout for a little over 2 years now. Mostly it's a routine job, scanning the horizon for smoke, reporting suspicious activity, checking the trails, and making sure hikers don't wander into restricted areas. It's the kind of job where hours pass quietly, the radio crackles once in a while, and loneliness becomes a normal part of life. Some people can't handle it. But me? I like the isolation. I like the steady rhythm of the forest. That was before everything changed. Before something happened that I still can't explain. It all started on a warm late summer evening, the kind where the sky turns gold and the entire forest looks like it's glowing. I was finishing my shift at Tower 17, a lookout post perched on a ridge overlooking thousands of acres of pine and spruce. The tower itself was small, just a wooden cabin built 20 feet above the ground with windows on all sides. From up there, you could see the valley stretching forever, the trails winding like thin scars through the trees, and the mountains rising in the distance like sleeping giants. I loved that view. It made the world feel simple, predictable, safe. But that night something felt off. Even before the radio call. Even before I heard the words, Code Black. I didn't know what Code Black meant. None of us did. And that alone was strange. In all our training we learned every emergency code used in the Forest Service. Code red for fire, code blue for injury, code green for evacuation, code yellow for severe weather. But there was never a code black. Not in the manuals. Not in briefings. Not in our renewal trainings. Nowhere. So when it came over the radio, spoken in a low voice by someone who sounded tense and out of breath, it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something no one was supposed to say out loud. That night, before the call, I was sitting by the window with a thermos of coffee, watching the sun drop behind the tree line. Everything was still. No wind. No rustling leaves. No distant chatter of hikers heading back to camp. The kind of stillness that should feel peaceful, but didn't. It was too quiet. Like the forest was waiting for something. I remember glancing down the dirt road leading to the tower. It was empty, but for some reason I felt like it shouldn't be. I kept expecting to see Ranger Collins' truck pull up, or maybe a lost hiker waving for help. But nothing moved. Around 7:45, the radio clicked on. A soft click, not the sharp kind we usually hear when someone presses the button. It crackled like someone had brushed their fingers across it accidentally. Then a voice, low and shaky, whispered, "Tower 12, do you copy?" The strange thing was Tower 12 had been vacant for months. No one staffed it. The place was undergoing repairs after a storm knocked half the roof off. So hearing that call made my stomach tighten. I picked up the radio and answered, "Tower 17 responding. Tower 12, your channel is open. Identify, please." There was silence for a moment. Then the voice came again, clearer this time but still tense. "This is Ranger Hale. Anyone near Tower 12, respond immediately. We're issuing a code black." I froze. Ranger Hale wasn't scheduled anywhere near my sector. And code black, well, that wasn't a thing. Not officially. I pressed the button again. "Ranger Hale, please repeat your message. What is a code black?" Over. But the radio cut out. Not the transmission. No, the entire radio went dead. The small green power light dimmed for a second like the tower had lost power, then came back on with a faint buzz. The signal indicator blinked red, meaning no connection. That had never happened before, not even in storms. For the first time in a long while, I felt nervous. Something was wrong and every instinct in my body knew it. The sun was almost gone now, and the valley below was sinking into shadow. Most nights I would admire the way the fading light painted the trees in darker blues and greens. But tonight it felt like the darkness was rising, not falling. Like it was creeping upward, reaching for the tower. At 8:03, the radio flickered back to life. Another voice came through, calm, steady, official. A dispatcher. "All stations stand by. Repeat, all stations stand by. We are assessing a situation near Sector 9. A short pause. Units near Tower 12, proceed with caution. Stay in your structures and await instruction." Her voice sounded controlled, but I could hear something beneath it. Worry. Or maybe fear. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the forest in the direction of Tower 12. It was too far to see the structure clearly, but I could make out the top of the ridge it stood on. Nothing unusual. No smoke. No movement. No emergency vehicles. So what was happening? I lowered the binoculars and stepped back. That's when I heard it. A sound carried from somewhere deep in the forest. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't wind. It was something slower. Heavier. A long, low groaning noise like trees straining under pressure. But the trees weren't moving. The air wasn't shifting. Yet the sound kept going, rumbling like it came from under the earth. My heartbeat picked up. It wasn't loud enough to be alarming, but it wasn't right. I'd lived in these woods long enough to know every kind of natural noise, and this wasn't one of them. I turned back to the radio and tried to call dispatch. Tower 17 to base, do you copy? Nothing. Base, this is Tower 17, requesting clarification on code black. Still nothing. When the radio finally spoke again, I wasn't prepared for what I heard. It was a man's voice. Calm but serious. All units, this is Chief Ranger Dalton. A code black is now active for sectors 9 through 14. If you are in a tower, remain inside. Do not attempt to leave your post. Repeat, do not leave your tower. Secure all doors and windows immediately. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, gripping the radio, replaying his words in my head. Do not leave your tower. Secure everything. Remain inside. None of our emergency codes had ever told us to stay put. Not even during wildfire alerts. If anything, we were supposed to evacuate early. So whatever a code black was, it had to be something different. Something serious. Something the public wasn't supposed to know existed. I moved to the door and locked it. Then I checked all the windows even though they were already shut. My hands were shaking a little. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. Outside, the sky was almost completely dark now. Only a faint sliver of orange remained at the edge of the horizon. The first stars were beginning to appear. But the forest looked wrong. It looked darker than usual. Thicker. Almost like the trees had lost their shapes and blended into one giant shadow. I sat down at the desk, staring at the silent radio, waiting for someone to explain what was going on. But for several minutes there was nothing. Just static. Then the strange groaning sound came again, louder this time. Closer. I stood up slowly and moved toward the window. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me not to. But I did anyway. At first I saw nothing. Just the usual dark stretch of trees and the faint outline of the ridge. But then, far down in the valley, a shape moved. Not fast. Not sudden. Just wrong. It was too far to see clearly. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was just a darker patch of darkness sliding between the trees, almost blending in. Almost. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. But when I looked again, it was gone. The radio crackled. Then a voice, barely above a whisper, came through. Tower 17. Ryan, if you're still there, whatever you do, don't look outside. My breath caught. The voice wasn't a ranger. It wasn't dispatch. It was someone I knew. Someone who shouldn't have my radio frequency. Someone who had been missing for months. And before I could respond, the radio cut out again. The groaning sound echoed from below the tower, louder now, rising slowly through the still air. And this time something moved in the trees, closer than before. I backed away from the window, my heart thudding hard, unsure whether to hide, call for help, or just keep staring at the door. Because suddenly, for the first time in my life, I was terrified of what the forest was trying to show me. And even more terrified of what it didn't want me to see. That I didn't move for a long moment. I just stood there, staring at the radio like it might come back to life and explain everything. Hearing that voice, his voice, shook me in a way I didn't expect. I hadn't heard from him since early spring, when he vanished during a routine trail sweep. Everyone assumed he'd gotten lost or injured somewhere deep in the backcountry. Search teams spent days combing the woods, calling his name, marking every tree they searched. They found nothing. Not a shoe, not a backpack, not even a broken branch that suggested where he went. It was the kind of disappearance that made the forest feel bigger than it really was. But hearing him say my name on the radio, whispering like he was hiding from something, it made the air in the tower feel thinner. I tried to swallow, but my throat was tight. I kept thinking, how does he know my frequency? And why did he say not to look outside? The forest groaned again, a slow, deep sound that rolled beneath the floorboards. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. My pulse drummed in my ears. I tried to convince myself that the noise was natural, maybe a distant rock slide or an old tree shifting under its own weight. But the sound didn't feel like nature. It felt intentional, like something was pushing against the earth itself. I forced myself to breathe slowly, reminding myself of everything I knew about this place. The national forest had always been known for strange stories: lost hikers who wandered back with no memory of where they'd been, campers who claimed they heard distant whispers at night, old rangers talking about odd shadows shifting between the pines. Most were just tales people liked to exaggerate for fun. But a few felt real. Like the forest had a side most people weren't meant to see. I'd first taken this job because I liked the quiet. The open sky. The long stretches of peace where the loudest sound was the wind. I didn't expect mystery or danger. But every so often, things would happen that stayed with me. Like the time I found fresh boot prints circling the tower one morning, even though no one had visited the area for days. Or when a hiker claimed he saw someone standing motionless among the trees at dusk, staring at him without blinking. But when rangers checked, there were no tracks, no signs of anyone being there. Little things. Strange things. Things we shrugged off because the forest plays tricks on you when you're tired or alone. But tonight was different. It didn't feel like tricks. It felt deliberate. I moved back to the desk and grabbed the radio again even though I doubted it would work. "This is Tower 17, I said quietly. "If anyone can hear me, I need a status update." Only static answered. No voices. No orders. No explanation. Just that low buzz filling the room. I set the radio down and leaned on the desk. My hands were sweaty. I wiped them on my pants trying to think clearly. If Ranger Hale called out a code black, if the chief ranger told us to stay inside, if the radio cut out twice, then whatever was happening wasn't small. It wasn't routine. Something serious was going on and we weren't being told the full truth. Maybe we were never meant to know the full truth. I stepped back toward the window slowly, careful not to bump anything or make noise. I wasn't even sure why, just a feeling that something outside was listening. I kept my distance but looked out again only long enough to scan the valley. The trees were pitch black now, swaying gently even though I couldn't feel any wind. It was as if the forest was moving on its own. I tried to focus on something familiar, something human. I thought about Ranger Hale. He was strict but fair, always following protocol to the letter. The kind of ranger who'd never use a non-existent code unless he had no choice. Whatever he saw near Tower 12 must have been serious. And then there was the missing ranger, the one whose voice I heard. He'd been my friend. We trained together. He joked about the forest like it was some old friend who needed constant attention. Hearing him whisper like that made my chest tighten. I didn't want to think about what could make someone disappear for months and then return with a voice that's soft and broken. I stepped away from the window again. The groaning sound faded for a moment, replaced by a different noise, a faint tapping on the metal legs of the tower. Light, slow, spaced apart like someone gently tapping with a stick. The kind of sound that wouldn't scare anyone in daylight, but at night, after everything that happened, it made my skin crawl. I held my breath and listened. Tap, tap. Silence. Tap. I didn't want to imagine what could be at the base of the tower. Maybe it was an animal brushing against the support beams, or a loose piece of metal shifting. But it didn't sound like nature. It sounded rhythmic. I stepped to the center of the room trying to stay calm. My thoughts kept drifting to the missing ranger. The last time I saw him, he was smiling, talking about bringing new batteries for his GPS because it kept shutting off on the far trails. He was always prepared. Always careful. If he got into trouble, there had to be a reason. The tapping stopped, replaced again by silence. A heavy silence that pressed against the windows. I walked to the small wooden table near the corner and picked up the emergency flashlight. My hand trembled slightly as I flicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness inside the tower, but I didn't dare point it outside. Something in me, maybe instinct or fear, told me not to shine light into the forest. I sat down on the edge of the cot and tried to gather my thoughts. I needed to stay grounded. I needed to stay alert. And most of all, I needed to figure out why someone had warned me not to look outside. Maybe he saw something. Something that changes you when you look at it. The idea made me shiver, but it also made sense in a strange way. People disappear in forests all the time. But this wasn't normal missing person behavior. This felt like something else. Something older. Something hidden. The radio crackled again, making me jump slightly. But instead of voices, all I heard was faint breathing. Slow. Unsteady. Like someone was holding the button down a short distance away. I leaned in closer. "Hello? Identify yourself." The breathing continued for a few seconds. Then the voice came, barely audible. "Ryan, don't look for me." My chest tightened again. It was him. I whispered. "Where are you?" He breathed shakily. Then he said something I'll never forget. "It knows you're listening." And the radio died again, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of fear rising in my chest. I stared at the radio waiting, but it didn't come back. Outside, the darkness pressed against the windows like it wanted in. The tapping noise returned once, then stopped. The forest groaned again, softer but still unnatural. I stood slowly, feeling every muscle in my body tense. Something was happening out there. Something the Forest Service didn't want us talking about. Something the missing ranger had seen, or heard, or felt. And now it was near my tower. I backed away from the window again, gripping the flashlight, listening for any new sound. Every part of me felt watched, even though I couldn't see anything. I didn't know what a code black meant, but I was starting to understand what it felt like. Something was out there. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. And it was getting closer. Trying not to focus on the tapping or the strange groaning sounds drifting through the trees. The darkness outside felt almost alive now, like it was stretching itself around the tower, tightening slowly. Every instinct in me said not to look, not to move, not to make a sound. But sitting still only made the tension worse. My mind kept racing, jumping between memories, questions, and the small hints of truth that were starting to come together. My friend's voice echoing through the radio made everything feel personal. It wasn't some far-off emergency happening in another part of the forest. It was here. It was close. And now the mystery wasn't just about a missing ranger, it was about something bigger, something hidden behind the routine and tradition of working in the national forest. I kept thinking about the training session we had months ago, when Chief Ranger Dalton gathered a small group of us for a special briefing. It wasn't official. It wasn't recorded. He just told us that the forest had historical incidents that didn't fit normal explanations. Strange sounds. Lost hikers found miles from where they disappeared. Reports of figures seen at dusk that vanished when approached. We thought he was just giving us the usual cautionary tales. A way to remind us to stay alert and respect our limits. But now, listening to the echo of my missing friend's warning, Dalton's words felt heavier. Like he'd been trying to prepare us for something without actually saying it. The tapping suddenly stopped mid-stride, leaving a strange ringing silence in its place. I didn't move. My breath felt loud in the quiet room. I wondered if whatever was outside could hear it. The idea made my skin prickle. I walked to the desk again and opened the small logbook we were required to update every shift. Normally I'd fill it with weather notes, trail conditions, or small reports about wildlife. But now it felt like the only thing grounding me. I flipped to a blank page and wrote a quick note. Radio interference continues. Unknown noises around Tower 17. Possible unauthorized presence below tower. Multiple code black warnings. Do not investigate outside. Writing it down didn't make me feel safer. But it made everything feel real in a different way. Documented. Acknowledged. Like I wasn't completely alone with what I was experiencing. As I set the pencil down, the radio clicked softly again, just once, as if someone barely tapped the button. Not static. Not breathing. Just a small click. I leaned toward it, waiting, but nothing else came through. For a moment, I wondered if another lookout tower was trying to reach me. Tower 9 wasn't too far from here. Tower 11 was across the valley. Maybe one of them heard the same sounds. Maybe they saw something. Maybe they were scared too. The thought brought a strange comfort. Fear is easier to carry when you know someone else is carrying it too. I grabbed the radio again. This is Tower 17. Any unit with copy, respond. I waited. If you're hearing the code black in your sector, check in. Anyone out there? Static washed over the speaker. A soft hum. Nothing more. I let go of the button and leaned back, exhaling slowly through my nose. My heart was still beating fast, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. Fear fogs your brain if you let it, and I needed to think. The main conflict, the heart of everything happening tonight, kept circling in my mind. The forest wasn't behaving naturally. Neither were the people involved. Not the missing ranger. Not Hale. Not Dalton. Code black had to mean something everyone was trained not to talk about. Something old. Something hidden in the forest's history. But why tonight? Why now? Why my sector? I moved toward the window again, this time keeping my focus slightly above the horizon rather than at the ground. I didn't want to accidentally catch sight of something I wasn't meant to see. The moonlight barely cut through the thick canopy, making everything below look like one solid sheet of shadow. I stared into the darkness, searching for any shape or movement I could identify. Nothing. But just because I couldn't see anything didn't mean nothing was there. I stepped away again, trying to distract my mind with something else. Anything else. So I focused on a small subplot in the back of my thoughts. A memory from earlier that week, when a pair of hikers reported hearing someone calling for help near the old creek bed. By the time rangers checked the area, there were no footprints, no signs of struggle, nothing but a few disturbed leaves. The hikers insisted they heard a man shouting, but the official report listed it as misinterpretation of natural sounds. Now I wasn't so sure. Maybe the forest echoed in ways we didn't understand. Or maybe it was something, or someone, else entirely. Another subplot surfaced. A conversation I overheard last month between two senior rangers. One of them said something like, "If we see anything unusual in the valley, we're supposed to report it directly to Dalton. Not on the main channel." I remember thinking that was strange, but I dismissed it. Every organization has weird rules, right? Now I wished I'd paid more attention. Maybe people had been seeing things for a long time, but the higher-ups didn't want it going public. I paced the small room again, feeling the tension grow with every minute of silence. My mind kept drifting back to my missing friend. I remembered how he talked about the forest like it was alive, how he respected it more than anyone. Maybe that respect kept him safe for a while. Maybe it's why he survived long enough to talk to me through the radio tonight. But why did he say, "Don't look for me"? That line repeated in my mind over and over. It didn't feel like fear. It felt like a warning. Like he knew that looking for him meant looking for something else too. Something that wouldn't let me go as easily. The tower creaked suddenly, as if something brushed against one of the support beams. I froze. Then a second creak followed. This one longer. Lower. Like something heavy was leaning against the structure. I backed up slowly, gripping the flashlight tightly. The beam shook slightly in my hand, catching the edges of the desk and caught. I didn't turn the light toward the window. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see a shadow or nothing at all. The creaking faded. But the stillness didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. I forced myself to think again, to analyze instead of panic. There had to be a pattern. The groaning sounds. The tapping. The sudden radio interference. The personal warning. The restricted code no one explained. It all pointed to something organized, not random. Something that came with rules. Maybe the Forest Service knew more than they let on. Maybe certain rangers were given silent orders, trained to look out for something other than fires or lost hikers. Something classified. Something that didn't belong in public logs. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, small vibration under my boots. Just one. Like the earth pulsed gently. The tower didn't shake. Nothing fell or moved. But I felt it, subtle and unsettling. I held my breath, waiting for another tremor, but none came. The radio clicked again. Just one soft click. I stared at it, not moving, barely breathing. Then a voice, soft, low, and strained, whispered through the speaker. "It's coming your way." The radio went silent. My heart dropped into my stomach. I turned slowly toward the window, not daring to get close, but close enough to see that the darkness outside wasn't still anymore. Something was shifting between the trees. Not fast. Not loud. Just there. Moving. And it was headed toward the tower. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, staring into the dark stretch of forest like it might open its mouth and swallow the whole tower. My breath felt shallow, thin, barely filling my lungs. Whatever was moving out there wasn't rushing or stomping or breaking branches the way an animal would. It moved smoothly, like it didn't have to push through the undergrowth at all. Like the forest made room for it. The flashlight felt too small in my hand, like a toy instead of something useful. I kept it pointed toward the floor, not wanting to attract attention. Every small instinct I had kept screaming the same thing. Stay still. Be quiet. Don't look directly at it. I stepped backward slowly, staying away from the windows. The tower felt even smaller now, like the walls were closing in. The air felt heavier, pressing at my chest. My missing friend's voice echoed in my head. "It knows you're listening." The radio stayed silent. No help. No warning. No guidance. Just silence that felt colder than the night. I walked quietly to the corner of the room and crouched down beside the small filing cabinet. It wasn't much protection, but at least it made me feel less exposed. I tried to listen, really listen, to whatever was coming through the forest. At first, all I heard was the faint creaking of the tower legs settling. Then, little by little, new sounds drifted in. A soft brushing, like something dragging across the ground. A slow shifting, like footsteps, but not quite. And underneath it all, the deep, low rumbling again. Not loud enough to shake the tower, but loud enough to feel. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to clear my thoughts. I kept thinking about the Forest Service, about their quiet rules and hidden codes. Code Black wasn't just a warning, it was a boundary. A line we weren't supposed to cross. And somehow, without asking for it, I was standing right on that line. The movement outside stopped suddenly. I froze. For a full 10 seconds there was nothing. No wind. No creaking. No brushing. No rumbling. Just silence. A tight, unnatural silence. Then something tapped on the metal support beam beneath me. Not lightly like before. This was firmer. Intentional. A single, solid tap that echoed up the frame of the tower and vibrated the floor under my boots. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. Another tap came, slower this time. Then another. 3 taps total. Like a signal. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I pressed myself closer to the cabinet, almost wishing the tower had walls instead of windows. The taps stopped, but the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, thick, like something was deciding what to do next. I wanted to call for help again. But I didn't want to hear nothing. And I didn't want to hear that voice again either, not the strained whisper telling me it was coming. I wasn't ready for either. Then, faintly, the radio clicked again, this time softer than a sigh. I stared at it, not daring to reach for it. No voice came through. Just a soft static hum. But the hum wasn't random, it rose and fell slowly, almost like breathing. I swallowed hard. The radio wasn't malfunctioning. Someone was holding the button down. Listening. I didn't speak. I didn't even move closer. I just watched the little red light on the radio blink slowly, in sync with that faint rise and fall of static. Then, without warning, the red light cut off. The breathing static ended. The radio went dead. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until air rushed out of me in a shaky exhale. The tower groaned lightly, like something brushed against one of the beams again. I turned toward the window, just a little, just enough to see the faint outline of trees, but I didn't step closer. I couldn't. Because something new was happening. The treetops were moving. Not swaying like wind. Moving. Shifting. Leaning. Like something big was passing through them. The forest canopy rippled in one slow motion, like a long wave rolling across the tops of the trees, heading straight toward the ridge where Tower 12 sat. My breath caught again. I could see the ridge faintly through the darkness, just a pale outline against the mountains. A faint glow appeared there. Not bright. Not natural. A soft, pulsing light, almost like a lantern swinging slowly. I blinked hard, not sure if my eyes were adjusting or playing tricks on me. But the glow didn't fade. It grew brighter, then dimmer, like something was breathing in light and letting it out again. The radio crackled, another small click, then silence again. I couldn't tell if the light was signaling me, or warning me. I stepped closer to the window, careful not to lean into it. My eyes focused on the ridge. The glow flickered once, twice. Then stretched into a thin line moving sideways, drifting slowly through the trees. Someone, or something, was holding it. I leaned back, heart racing. My missing friend. He vanished near that ridge. Near Tower 12. His last message came from that direction. Was he the one carrying the light? Or was something else using the light to draw me in? The forest rustled again, not loudly but enough to make me step backward. Something was closer now. Much closer. I heard a soft scrape along the lowest step of the tower's ladder. My blood ran cold. Something was climbing. Slowly. Deliberately. Step by step. My legs almost gave out, but I forced myself to move quietly toward the desk. I grabbed the heavy emergency flare from the drawer, not to use it but to hold it. To feel something solid. My palms were slick with sweat. The scraping paused. Then started again. One step higher. Then another. I backed toward the corner again, pressing myself against the wall. I didn't want to shine the flashlight outside. I didn't want to draw attention. I didn't want to see what was climbing. The footsteps reached the halfway point of the ladder. I felt my pulse in my throat. The radio clicked softly. Then a voice, barely audible, whispered, "Don't let it see you." My breath trembled. The voice wasn't my friend this time. It wasn't Ranger Hale. It wasn't Dalton. It was someone else. Someone I'd never heard before. Someone who sounded terrified. The footsteps reached the last few rungs of the ladder. The shadow on the ground shifted. Something paused just below the trapdoor. And the quiet that followed felt like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for me to make one wrong move. Something was at the door. Something that wasn't supposed to exist. And I could feel it, listening that I didn't dare breathe. Every muscle in my body locked up, like even the smallest movement might give me away. The trapdoor didn't rattle. The ladder didn't creak anymore. Whatever was out there, whatever had climbed all the way up, was just waiting. Listening. The air in the lookout felt tighter, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in a second, and even the radio seemed too loud sitting on the table, its tiny indicator light glowing like an exposed nerve. I kept my back pressed against the wall, slowly lowering myself into a crouch, trying to make myself smaller. My heartbeat felt like it was shaking the floorboards. I didn't know if that voice on the radio belonged to someone real or if it was another trick. But the fear in it, that was real. That wasn't a prank or some ranger messing around. That was someone who'd seen something they weren't supposed to see. Someone who knew exactly what was outside my door. A soft scrape echoed through the room. Not metal. Not wood. Something smoother. Something that barely touched the surface but was still heavy enough to make my stomach twist. I swallowed the panic climbing up my throat and forced myself to inch closer toward the radio without rising into full view of the windows. I kept low, moving slowly, trying to remember what Hale had told me on my first night. Always stay calm, always stay aware, always trust your gut. But my gut was telling me something I didn't want to hear, that whatever a code black was, this was it. And I was not ready. The scraping stopped. Silence again. Deep, empty silence that made the entire tower feel too fragile, like the thing outside could push one section of the wall and the whole place would snap. I stared at the trapdoor, watching for the faintest movement. Nothing came. Not at first. Then the shadow shifted again. Just a tiny movement, but enough to tell me the thing was inches away from entering. Watching. Maybe smelling the air leaking through the cracks. I covered my mouth with my sleeve, trying to muffle any sound. My eyes stung from keeping them open too wide, and I blinked slowly, terrified that even blinking might be too loud. The radio clicked again, just one tiny pop of static, but it sounded like thunder. I grabbed it instantly and held it close, shaking hands hovering over the button, not daring to press it. If I spoke, it would hear me. If anyone answered, it might hear them. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know the rules of whatever I was dealing with, and not knowing felt more dangerous than anything else. A soft, low exhale came from the other side of the trapdoor. Not human. Not like any animal I'd heard in the forest. Not like a bear or a wolf. The sound was too controlled. Too deliberate. Like it was testing something, waiting for my reaction. I bit down hard on my tongue to keep from gasping, the taste of iron catching me off guard. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I nearly screamed. I snatched it out and slammed it face down on the wooden floor, praying the vibration hadn't carried outside. The sound was so small, but in the dead quiet, it felt like an explosion. My chest tightened as I waited for whatever was outside to react. It didn't move. Not at first. But then, slowly, a soft tap came from the trapdoor. One tap. Not pushing. Not scratching. Just tapping. Like it knew exactly where I was standing. Like it was knocking. I sank lower, my back trembling against the wall. The tower had never felt smaller. I could hear the forest again through the open windows, distant branches swaying, the low hum of insects, but all of it sounded wrong now. Like the whole place had tilted into something unfamiliar, something dangerous. The tapping stopped. Then a faint, muffled voice drifted through the trapdoor. But it wasn't a voice I recognized. It wasn't the whisper from the radio. It wasn't Ranger Hale or Dalton. It was my voice. My exact voice. Let me in. The words were soft, quiet, almost calm. But hearing them come from outside the tower made my skin crawl. My breath hitched in my chest as I stared at the door, not blinking, not thinking, just trying to understand how something could be mimicking me so perfectly. I didn't move. I couldn't. Let me in, my voice repeated. This time it sounded a little closer. A little clearer. Like whatever was out there was leaning closer to the crack in the trapdoor just to let the sound in. My hands felt cold and numb. My legs were shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to run, but I had nowhere to go. The lookout tower was a dead end, and the thing outside knew it. The radio buzzed again, a quiet breath of static before a new whisper emerged. Not my own voice. Not Hale's. Not Dalton's. A stranger again, still terrified, still barely audible. Don't speak, they whispered. It repeats whatever hears you. That's how it learns. My stomach dropped. I clapped a hand over my mouth instantly. Outside, my own voice whispered, "Don't speak." Then again lower, slower. That's how it learns. The thing was copying the warning. Mimicking it like a recording, but wrong. Too stretched. Too soft. Like it was practicing. The radio clicked again with a tiny crackle. "Listen to me," the terrified voice said, breath shaky. "If it knows your voice, it tries to wear it. If you respond, if you say anything, it becomes harder to tell the difference. Harder to stop." My throat tightened. "What is it?" I whispered back before I could stop myself. The moment the words left my mouth, I froze. Silence. Deep, empty silence. No tap. No scrape. Nothing. Then, right outside the trapdoor, my own voice whispered back to me, flawless and quiet. "What is it?" I nearly dropped the radio. My knees weakened as something pressed gently against the door from below. Not breaking it, not forcing it, just resting there, feeling the shape, learning the barrier. I backed away slowly, inch by inch, until my shoulders hit the opposite wall again. My breaths came out uneven. My mind raced. I didn't know what a code black was, but I was starting to understand why nobody wanted to explain it. The radio crackled one last time, the frightened voice sounding weaker now. "You need to leave the tower before it opens the door," they whispered. "You don't have much time." I stared at the trapdoor. I didn't want to look, but I saw it anyway, the slightest, slowest shift. The thing outside was trying to lift it, and as the first tiny gap appeared between the wood and the frame, I heard my own voice, closer than ever, whisper, "Let's switch places." My first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go except out the windows or down the ladder, straight toward whatever was trying to get inside. The trapdoor lifted only half an inch, but even that tiny movement felt like the whole tower tilted. My own voice, too soft, too calm, slid through the gap again, whispering that same line, "Let's switch places," like it already knew the ending of the story I didn't want to hear. I forced myself to breathe slower. Panicking wasn't helping. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I realized there was something the stranger on the radio hadn't said directly, but hinted at every time they warned me about speaking. This thing wasn't strong enough to just break its way in. It needed an opening. It needed permission. It needed a mistake. And I had almost given it exactly that. I reached for the heaviest thing in the room, a thick logbook, old and dusty, the kind Rangers used decades ago. I grabbed it with both hands and crouched low, staying out of sight of the windows. When the trapdoor lifted another inch, I swung the book down with all the strength I had. The door slammed shut with a loud crack, shaking the entire tower. The voice on the other side stopped instantly. No tapping. No scratching. Just stillness. Then, a slow slide of weight moving down the ladder. One step at a time. Like it was giving up. Or maybe just waiting for another night, another mistake, another lookout who didn't know what a code black meant. I wasn't going to be that lookout. I stayed frozen until the footsteps finally reached the ground. I didn't stand until I heard them fade into the trees, swallowed by the forest. Even then, I waited longer, listening to every sound, making sure nothing else was lurking below the tower. When I felt brave enough to speak, I picked up the radio again. My voice shook so badly I barely recognized it. "Are you still there?" I whispered. For a long moment, nothing responded but static. Then the same frightened voice came back, softer now. "You survived," they said, like it wasn't something that happened often. "Good. You didn't let it in." "What was that thing?" I asked, keeping my tone low, careful. "A code black," they answered, and this time the words didn't feel mysterious, they felt heavy. "It's not one creature. It's a category. A type of mimic. It doesn't look like anything at first. It becomes whatever it hears. It uses sound to map you. Voice, habits, footsteps. If it learns enough, it can move like you, talk like you. That's why we warn every lookout. Silence is safety." I felt my stomach twist. Why didn't anyone explain this to me before? "Because most people quit the moment they hear it," the voice replied. "They panic. They tell others. And panic spreads faster than anything in these woods. The only way the forest stays protected is if the new lookouts think code black is just a rare emergency, not a nightly threat." I swallowed hard. "Who are you?" There was a long pause before they answered. Someone who didn't listen soon enough. I didn't know what that meant, but the static rising behind their voice made my skin prickle. Before I could ask anything else, the radio clicked 3 times in rapid succession. A warning signal, one I hadn't heard before, and then the channel went dead. No goodbye. No explanation. Just silence. But it wasn't like the silence from before. It didn't feel dangerous now. It felt empty. Like whoever had warned me didn't have the energy to stay any longer. I stayed awake until sunrise, gripping the logbook and the flashlight, waiting for the first touch of sunlight to lay across the trees. And when it came, everything changed. The forest looked normal again. Alive. Far from the nightmare I felt trapped in just hours earlier. It was hard to believe something could make the world feel so different depending on whether it was day or night that I didn't go down the ladder until I checked every angle from the windows and waited longer than I needed to. When I finally descended, every step made my legs shake, but the fresh air felt grounding. The ground felt real. Safe. Like the world had returned to what it was supposed to be. By the time I reached the ranger station, Hale was already outside, sipping coffee like he hadn't been worried at all. But when he saw me, he froze. Just for a second. Just long enough to tell me he knew exactly what kind of night I'd had. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I didn't need to answer. He could see it in my face. He set his coffee aside and walked closer. Most people don't make it through a first encounter. You kept your head. That's good. I let out a shaky breath. You should have warned me. Hale rubbed the side of his jaw, looking older than usual. We warn you the way we can. If I told you the whole truth, you wouldn't have come up here at all. And the forest needs lookouts. Real ones. People who don't run at the first strange sound. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but I understood it. Not everything in the forest could be explained. Some things were only learned through experience, through surviving the night. Hale opened the station door for me. Come on. You need rest. And when you wake up, we'll talk about what happens next. What does happen next? I asked. He gave me a small, tired smile. You decide. Most lookouts quit after their first code black. But if you stay, you learn the forest the way it really is. You learn where the old paths are, the rules that keep you safe, the signs most people miss. And you learn how not to feed the things that listen. I didn't answer right away. I just let the weight of his words settle. A day ago I thought this job was simple. Boring even. Now I understood why it paid well, why the hours were strange, why every ranger here carried more stories in their eyes than in their logs. That night changed me. It taught me that the forest has secrets. That some things rely on quiet, on patience, on the way darkness hides things we aren't meant to see. It taught me that not every warning needs to be loud to be clear. And even now, when I think back to that voice, my own voice, whispering through the trapdoor, I feel that same chill crawl up my spine. But I also feel something else. Something steady. The knowledge that fear doesn't have to win, not if you learn how to face it. I stayed with the job. Not because I wasn't scared. But because I learned that being scared doesn't mean you're in danger. And being brave doesn't mean you're not. In the end, the forest didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a place that demanded respect. A place with rules older than any ranger. A place that tests you, teaches you, and sometimes warns you before you realize you need warning. And if you ever hear someone whispering from outside your door, especially if they sound exactly like you, remember one thing. Don't answer.